Good morning to all. This is John Kogan. I am the CEO of Proformative, the online community for corporate finance, accounting, treasury, and related professionals. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, New Ways of Looking into the Future with Rolling Forecasts. For businesses, rolling forecasts built on driver-based and project-based planning create a framework that supports better decision-making across the enterprise. Today's webinar content will focus on how to define your company's objectives in creating a rolling forecast and best practices in analyzing the dynamics of revenues and expenses in your business. We will also hear from an FP&A leader about how his company is utilizing rolling forecasts and the lessons they have learned. First off, before we get going, a great thanks to our sponsor, Host Analytics, obviously steeped in rolling forecasts, budgeting and forecasting technology, and with their support, we're able to put on an event like this and everything we do at Proformative at absolutely no cost to any of our users or attendees. So we greatly thank Host Analytics for their support and their expertise, which they also lent to today's program. A few quick items before we get into today's content. Number one, a quick welcome to Proformative. Proformative is the largest and fastest growing online resource for senior finance, treasury, accounting, and related professionals. We welcome everyone this morning, and if you haven't checked us out online, please do so. We've got a wonderful community with literally tens of thousands of folks contributing, asking questions, answering questions. It's all peer-to-peer. It's all completely ad-free and noise-free, so no selling or self-promotion allowed. It's just a great place to go to get advice and insight from your peers. A few notes on today's event. Number one, a link to today's presentation and a link to a video of this webinar will be sent out to all attendees within 24 hours of this event. However, a soft copy of today's presentation has in fact already been posted at proformative.com/resources. So if you care to print it out, follow along, do whatever you want to do on your end, you can go ahead and grab that now. Of course, it's free, like everything on Proformative. So proformative.com/resources, and I looked a little earlier, it is the top item on that page. So you can hop out there and grab it anytime you like. Next up, we are offering CPE credits today. In order to get the CPE credits, you need to be registered for that. If you forgot to pre-register when you were signing up for the event, or you would have just checked a little box, feel free to contact Chris Brower. It's actually Christine, so her email is cbrower@proformative.com. Just drop her a line. Now, in order to get the CPE credits, not only do you have to have registered, but you also need to answer the 3 polling questions which will be posted today. One about a third of the way in, the final 2 will be about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way in, and answer those as we go. Although even if you're not here for CPE credit, those questions are statistical in nature. We'd love to hear what everyone thinks about them. So if you can go ahead and give us 10-15 seconds to answer those poll questions, that would be great. Next, please do ask questions as we go. If you take a quick peek at your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see that there's a questions zone. It might be closed, in which case you have to hit the plus next to the word questions. But you can ask a question at any time, and we will do our best to get to it today. The Q&A period is at the end of today's webinar, so after the 2 presentations that we'll be looking at first, then we'll get to the Q&A. If you have clarifying questions, we'll do our best to answer them as we go. Finally, after we close down today's webinar, we would love to have you stay on for just another 60 seconds to take a short survey regarding the webinar. It's all multiple choice stuff. You can zip right through it. Plus, if you would like to speak to either of today's presenters or be connected with today's sponsor, Host Analytics, we make that as easy as another click of the mouse. So we're happy to help broker those introductions. Just stay on for the survey and click where you'd like to be connected, and we'll make that connection. Easy enough. We have a number of learning objectives today, but just overall, we'd love to help you understand what rolling forecasts are, how they work, some best practices around adopting a rolling forecast program, which is really quite different. I've been in finance and accounting for over 20 years myself, and the rolling forecast is something that's new to companies big and small. So we really want folks to learn about, well, what it is in theory, and then also hear about how it works in practice. Today, that's really what this event is all about. So we hope you come away with a much better understanding of this topic. And helping us get underway this morning, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Brian Dehmler-Buckley, who's a Principal Product Manager at Host Analytics. Brian brings 13 years of experience in the corporate performance management software space to Host Analytics. Serving in a number of different capacities, he's been an implementation consultant, subject matter expert for engineering, critical customer success manager, and product manager for companies such as Hyperion Solutions and Oracle, which acquired Hyperion, and Host Analytics. Prior to beginning his career in corporate performance management software, Brian leveraged his accounting and finance background working in public accounting and in finance for a global publisher. Brian, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Welcome, and please do take it away.
Thanks a lot, John. Happy to be here, and thanks for having us here today.
You bet.
Okay, great. So getting started, I'm going to be talking about a little bit of the theory that John referenced in his intro to this session, and then we'll transition to Rick, where he'll talk about a more empirical example. So at Host Analytics, we've had the privilege of working with thousands of finance professionals over the last decade as we've evolved our solution. And in this time, we've had a chance to hear from a large number of CFOs, and they basically told us that they focus on getting 3 pillars of success right. And starting out in the bottom left-hand corner with accountability, they really focus on driving accountability throughout their organization. So what this means is that every manager takes ownership of the budget in their area, and this means a shift from the kind of the old stage kind of centralized planning process where you have a lot of accountants sitting in the back room plugging away on the numbers, to more of a decentralized process where manager input, line-level individuals that have accountability and responsibility for the data are involved as a key step in the process. They've also focused on growth and putting in systems into place that allow them to adapt to situations like merger and acquisitions, the globalization of the economy, to be able to really scale the organization and provide the results that not only their internal stakeholders but also external shareholders have come to expect. And lastly, they're looking to deliver the right data at the right time. So the finance organization is enabling the better decision-making that are based upon facts, not just gut intuition, right? So there's more data that's out there. Everybody's heard of the concepts of big data and capturing a lot of the information that traditionally just was not available because systems weren't able to capture that information. And so now that is put at the fingertips of users, and as such, folks have an opportunity to make much better decisions. However, there are still challenges for the finance organization. And because of this, as we've seen, the traditional role of finance is of the accountant sitting in the back room crunching the numbers and always looking backwards to figure out what were the trends, what happened in the past, and let's use those to apply to the future. And they really were focused on financial metrics, not operational metrics. And because all of this information was kind of captured in the back rooms, there really wasn't buy-in across the organization, right? Folks didn't take ownership of the data that was being either given to them or reported out. And so over the past couple of years, we've seen that finance organizations have really evolved to be more of a business partner. They're involved in the strategic discussions. They have a seat at the table with the other C-level executives and really driving the performance of the company. And the reasons why they're able to do that is because they have data that is not just backwards looking, but it's also forward looking. There's a lot of predictive analytics that are happening within systems today. We've been able to combine operational data with financial data to help inform that much more significantly, so that the decisions that are being made are much more holistic in nature. And lastly, it's information that is at everybody's fingertips. It's not just in a select few, but it's distributed throughout the organization so that there's that single version of the truth that is being utilized to allow folks to make those much more strategic decisions and also be accountable for those decisions moving forward. And as I've touched on in a few of those examples, technology is certainly a piece of this. It's not the only piece, but it certainly is a key enabler. And as we put together processes such as rolling forecasts, you can leverage technology to make the processes much more efficient and effective. So let's see how CFOs have responded to this evolution. The information that you'll see on this slide, it comes from a research study that was done of approximately 540 CFOs. And as you can see, since over the past 5 years, CFOs are really starting to get that seat at the table. They're much more involved in those strategy discussions because they have such incredible information at their fingertips. And of course, that was borne out in a second finding on the survey, which is that almost 60% of their work really is around strategy and planning, right? Looking forward, where are we going to take this company? How are we going to get there? And what do we have to do as a company to really facilitate that? And because they're in such a central position in terms of defining the strategy, they need to have fantastic communication skills. And so CFOs are maybe in the past were somewhat perceived as being kind of in the background and in the back office and working through the information. And now they're out there espousing the benefits not only of technology and the systems that they're putting into place, but also the decisions that the company is making as a whole. And so ironically enough, only 10% cite financial reporting and 4% cite accounting as their most important skill. So kind of the main skill sets that you would have expected to see in a CFO several years ago, those are certainly being replaced by much more of a business partner that has the skills to communicate vision across the organization. Now, with all of this, kind of the evolution, we're also seeing that there are abilities in financial planning which are definitely noticed as being ways to have a competitive advantage and really take a stronger hold in the marketplace, but unfortunately they're not being widely adopted, right? There's only a quarter of folks are actually doing kind of scenario modeling. That would be what-if modeling, black cloud scenarios, and running those through and seeing what the results are so that they can make better decisions. Disaster planning and recovery, opportunity planning, so M&A activity, attacking competitors and taking additional market share, and really running those through the different analyses. It's not; those are not being widely embraced. So the question is, why is this not happening? And this study gives us a bit of a background for where finance organizations are today. Now we're going to begin to talk about where they want to be and what helps them get past some of these lower percentage items that they haven't had a chance to focus on. And the one we're going to talk about today is rolling forecasts. And so if you consider this, everybody would love to have a crystal ball to really be able to peer into the future. And for businesses, the desire becomes a necessity because having a vision of the future not only allows them for better and more strategic decision making, but allows them to do that in the present. Okay, rolling forecasts are built on driver-based and project-based planning, and they allow for the creation of a framework that supports better decision making. So a rolling forecast simply means that, just kind of in its basic terms, that each quarter or month a company projects 4 to 6 quarters or possibly 12 to 18 months ahead. And they're rolling actuals in as new periods close and chopping off those forecast periods that are then obsolete, and then reforecasting the remaining periods within that forecasting cycle. Now we'll get into a few more details in the best practices here shortly, which talk about specifically, what the process is associated with a rolling forecast and how to most effectively go about doing that. So a little bit about the why before we jump into the how-to. And the why companies use rolling forecast is really about allowing finance executives and key decision makers to see not only a financial view, but also an operational vision into the future. Right? It also helps them to assess next steps in their execution of the plan, understanding critical pivot points in the plan, and better judging the impact that the changing economy or competition may have on their plan. So what all of this really leads to is greater budget accuracy, right? There's fewer variances to explain and justify. There's less preparation time. We have, users that are focused on actual analysis versus the data collection, because we have these systems that are providing information in a much more streamlined, efficient manner. And then, lastly, we have increased profitability because we're making better decisions, right? If we have better information going into the system, we're going to have better information coming out of the system. And so all of that leads to better decision making and ultimately better performance for the company. So let's look at a few examples of host analytics customers who have embraced the new planning practices as the finance org has evolved their role within the organization and some of the successes that they've achieved. Now, we're going to talk specifically about rolling forecasts here shortly, but some of these are actual enhancements just to the budgeting process. So let's look at the first one, hours to run a what-if analysis. Before this company, Bama Companies, was taking 8 hours, and now afterwards it's taking 1. 8 hours is a full day to run a particular scenario, and now they're knocking it out within an hour. Similarly, when we talk about collecting data, we have companies that would spend 90% of their time just collecting the data, no time for analysis, or very little time for analysis. But now they're having the complete opposite, right? It only takes 10% to actually collect that data, and they have 90% of their time to analyze, make better decisions, run some models, and figure out what the best decisions are for the company. And lastly, when you think about the time savings that are associated with having systems in place to help facilitate some of these processes, is that you have an ability to open up the resources and what they're able to do. So you consider a company like MWH Global, where they have a 50% reduction in planning time. So if it had taken, let's say, a month to prepare or 2 months to prepare an annual budget, now they're doing it in a month, they have a whole extra month of savings to focus on value-added activities for the organization. So let's drill into the best practices specifically related to rolling forecasts and get a perspective as to how that can help your organization. So we're going to be covering 9 best practices in our discussion today here. And I'm not going to touch on all of them right here, but you'll see that when we drill into these, it's pretty holistic, meaning we're tackling a lot of areas of the organization. Starting with some technology, there's going to be some process, and there's going to be some strategic decisions as far as what type of information should I be including in this process. So we'll drill into these in just a second, but first we want to set the stage and understand where we're coming from. And many of our customers come to us because their current budgeting process has really hit a breaking point. Their challenges usually fall into the following buckets. There's low accountability, meaning you get a lot of responses that, hey, those aren't my numbers. There's no accountability being taken by the managers because they were not involved in the process. And similarly, there's some challenges around what type of information can be shared across the organization. Excel is a bit of a challenge because of, if you're sharing, let's say, sensitive salary information, you don't want to just be sending those spreadsheets around across the organization where it might fall into the wrong hands. Existing systems aren't scalable. There's a tremendous amount of time that's being spent on data collection and a very small amount of time that's being spent on the analysis. So if you consider, let's say, reorganizations or acquisitions being thrown into an existing model, the existing systems just aren't able to handle that. There's also poor decision making, right? There's broken links, there's version controls, there's data entry errors. Excel just really isn't built for the ability to do this type of modeling on such a comprehensive scale, right? And the budget processes themselves are taking so long to be pulled together because of these restrictions on the systems that by the time that it's finished, it's really out of date. It's not relevant anymore. And lastly, because of the disjointed nature of the process, managers are really having to make decisions without a full picture of what the data looks like. Okay, so finance departments are definitely taking action to address their growth issues and to address these roadblocks that they run into, and notably, they're turning to rolling forecasts to address these breakpoints. So we're going to start into our best practices at the ground floor. Okay, and the ground floor here really is that you need a system, right? You need to have a system, and Excel is not that system. It's a personal productivity tool. So in the next 8 practices, we'll really outline the functionality and the practices that are going to allow you to outstrip those roadblocks that Excel puts up for you. So the challenge with a system is that when companies start rolling forecasts in Excel and they can't keep them up to date because it really isn't just a single forecast, it's ultimately evolving. So what they really need to understand is that a baseline forecast needs to be created, and additional analysis and versions are going to be required to do such things as understanding the impact of major and minor alterations to the plan, running a plan against different drivers, copy the plan as a baseline for other plans, or performing variance and sensitivity analyses. So many are trying to utilize Excel for this planning process, but it really is cumbersome to get to not only just to get to the annual plan, but becomes entirely unwieldy when you start talking about rolling that plan forward month to month and really focusing on those drivers, which in a lot of instances are very challenging to get to. So you need a system over and above Excel. And to get the most out of the rolling forecast, you need a system that can provide the necessary functionality to accommodate not only budgeting, but also forecasting, planning, strategic management, as well as measurement. So Excel is just too labor-intensive, prone to error, and too difficult to provide that reporting. So you need a foundation to drive the best practices that we're talking about, which are going to start with understanding your objectives. And here this really means you just need to understand your business. What do you hope to get out of this forecasting process? Right? Some companies will focus on obtaining information related to top-line growth, or to margin growth, or to cost-cutting measures that need to be put into place. So as you go into designing a rolling forecasting system, you're going to need to really understand what are the objectives of putting this into place. And once you have a clearer view as to what type of information you're expecting to get out, you're going to be able to crystallize the vision for what information you're going to be putting into the system. So the next layer on this is that you need to understand the duration of the plan. Okay, as I mentioned in the introduction to this, you can have rolling forecasts that are anywhere from it might just be a 12-month rolling forecast. It might be 18 months. It might be 24 months. It might be 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Now that really depends upon your business, and there's no clear-cut formula for this. It really just depends upon the horizon within which you can be making decisions. So let's consider an oil and gas company that is out exploring for new oil fields. Well, their horizon, because of the time that it takes to actually develop an oil field, is going to be much longer than, let's say, a services organization that is responsible for delivering IT consulting services. So the duration of the plan for the oil and gas company is going to be quite significant. It may be anywhere from 25 to 30 years based upon some of the customers that we've worked with in the past. Whereas if you look at a services-based company, the horizon that they're looking at is much shorter, right? The individuals that are working for them, as well as the business that they are driving, has a much shorter lifespan. And so when they look to do their forecasting, they're probably in the 12 to 18-month range, where they can look at some macroeconomic factors and determine what type of business they would expect to see coming down their pike. So moving on to the next layer, which is talking about related drivers. This dovetails off of your objectives to some extent, as well as your duration. And the drivers are absolutely key when you start thinking about more regularity in the forecasting. So if you're planning annually and it's in a once-per-year exercise, drivers are important. But they're not nearly as important as when you're forecasting and reforecasting on a regular basis, say a monthly basis. So when you think of the magnitude of the pieces of input that are involved in that process, and you begin to touch those moving parts over and over again, it becomes much more cumbersome. So when you begin to forecast on this more regular basis, you're going to leverage drivers as part of the process. And the use of these drivers is really going to help provide the flexibility in the planning process and also the agility when you replan or create alternate plans. So if you think about it, the drivers in your business are those that are really going to affect the 80-20 rule, right? They're going to affect the 80% of your business. is probably controlled, right? There's some, there's labor costs that are probably built in. There's some overhead costs and so on down the line. And really where you're going to focus on those drivers is going to be impacting that 20%. What's going to push you over that edge and give you that competitive advantage in the marketplace. And so really understanding what those drivers are will give you the opportunity to focus your managers, which will ultimately allow more buy-in because they're going to be successful in developing the plans that the whole company is expecting. Now, you're also going to have some projects that are more comprehensive in nature. They span across the entire organization. And those we would categorize as capital and strategic projects. So you need to have an understanding of how those are going to be layered into the system as well. Typically, these are things like, let's say you may have a new IT infrastructure that's being put into place that is going to affect all the organizations across the company. And so everybody is going to have that layered into their plan. So you just have to ensure that there are specific buckets for capturing those types of projects so that every participant in the rolling forecasting process has knowledge into that and is able to bake that into their overall process so that they're not surprised at the last minute when those are added to their departments or business units. This is my favorite one. This is my favorite best practice just because I see it so often and I see the success when people do this right. It is recommended to start small. Don't try to bite off the entire enchilada when you're introducing a new process, especially rolling forecasting. The recommendation is to pick a particular business unit or a department and really work with those individuals to become evangelists for your organization. So this has a couple of benefits. One, not only does it allow you to really narrow in on the process and ensure that you get everything correct, because you're going to be implementing with a feedback loop so that folks have a clear understanding of how they're using it, and then you can make modifications and so forth. But then you really show so much value to that particular organization that they become evangelists for the broader organization. So finance isn't necessarily carrying the torch all alone, but you have some soldiers that are working with you to help carry the vision forward. So the next layer is to create a baseline plan. So this one really is that you need to have a starting point in the rolling forecasting process. And what that means is that when you create your annual budget, that typically is going to be your baseline plan. And then rolling off of that, you're going to be starting into your rolling forecast. Or some companies don't even do an annual plan anymore. They just are continually forecasting. And that's perfectly acceptable solution as well. But you need to have a starting point of, what is the structure? What, incorporating my duration, what am I expecting to get out of this plan, and who are the folks that are involved in this? And so having all that information pulled together into a baseline where everybody knows what the starting point is going to be imperative for ensuring success in your organization. And once you have this baseline plan and you've worked through the additional strategic projects, you will also want to tie this back to the strategic plan. That is an overall plan for the company, which really needs to be incorporated into the rolling forecasting process so that the vision of where you're going is always available to the managers that are involved in the rolling forecasting process. Without that vision, then they're a little bit like chickens with their heads cut off, where they're running around and they have some ideas as to where they want to go, but unless they're all marching in the same direction or marching towards that same goal, the efficiencies and the effectiveness of this process is going to be minimized to some extent. So keeping that visible and available to everybody participating in the process will certainly make this much more effective. So the last item we want to talk about is external conditions and how external conditions really impact your organization. And these are things like macroeconomic factors, microeconomic factors, and how those are going to be impacting your business. And this is really important because external factors, at least today, we're seeing with all the availability of big data, allow companies to make much more strategic decisions. And in doing so, they are enhancing the process, the rolling forecasting process, the budgeting process, with all this available information that didn't used to be out there to allow them to make better decisions. So we're really seeing that that those are enhancing the process that corporations go through. Just really quickly, I'm not going to spend much time on this because Rick is going to provide you a fantastic example. But basically, we had an organization that it had the same challenges, right? There was inconsistencies, there was long meetings or adjustments they couldn't really react to, and they implemented our rolling forecasting process, and they were able to save $1 million in inventory reduction. I mean, that's fantastic. I think everybody on this call would be happy to present that to their management team. Again, I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time here. This is really just kind of a growth cycle, as you would expect companies that were implementing the system, how they would evolve through utilizing the functionality in the Host Analytics CPM suite, which you can certainly go to our website and find out. Lastly, just to touch on a bit of cloud technology before Rick jumps in here. Basically, we're moving from an expensive, upfront cost, hardware-intensive, software-intensive model to a lower total cost of ownership. Subscription-based, you're free of the burdens of IT and the reliance on other folks to manage your systems and processes, and you become a much more agile participant in the organization. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, I think, for our first polling question.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and launch the first of 3 polling questions right now. And it should be coming up on your screen in just a moment. As I mentioned earlier, whether or not you're here for CPE credit, we would love it if you would go ahead and answer all of these polling questions. If we have time during the Q&A section, we'll go ahead and turn these around and see what everyone on the call is thinking about doing or what their companies are thinking about doing. So that will be interesting to get to, and hopefully we'll have time for that. I'll go ahead and leave this open for another few seconds. Obviously, very quick and easy question. And then we'll go ahead and move on to our second speaker. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll now. Click, there we go. And next up, I am going to go ahead and turn the reins over to our next speaker, Rick Odom, who is Manager of Financial Planning and Analysis with Welch, Allyn, Inc. Rick has been with Welch, Allyn for over 26 years in the finance organization, holding various roles. Currently, he's a manager in the FP&A group, where he's responsible for coordinating the consolidation of quarterly forecasts, as well as the implementation of software from Host Analytics. Rick also manages the annual budget process, as well as serving as the finance lead for the administrative cost centers. Rick, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Okay, thank you, John. I'd like to just give a little bit of background on Welch, Allyn. We are a privately held, family-owned manufacturer of medical diagnostic instruments. We have about over $600 million in annual sales. We're based up in the snow belt, up in upstate New York, in Syracuse, but we have a global presence in over 50 countries, and we basically deal in approximately 15 different currencies throughout the world. We are a fully integrated SAP company, and our IT is outsourced to IBM. We looked at forecasting, implementing forecasting in early 2010 at the direction of our CFO at the time, and it was fully supported by our full executive committee. And the push really was to get started, even though it's not perfect. Our CFO really drove home the point that improvements would come over time. And Brian mentioned starting small, and I guess I would just say get started. Just jump right in and do it. You're not going to be perfect to start, but just get going. We do an 18-month rolling forecast here at Welch, Allyn, and we produce that quarterly. Our process really is that in the third month of a quarter, we spend about 2 weeks producing the new 18-month forecast. And then after we close that third month of the quarter, we adjust and finalize the new forecast, and then we begin reporting against it. Excuse me. We forecast about 34 P&Ls. One's consolidated and the rest are all regional throughout the world. We also forecast a balance sheet, a cash flow, and a capital plan each quarter. And then once a year we produce a 12-month budget, which ends up being just an extension of that forecast at the time. And that's where we are right now. Our latest forecast that we did in September is the basis for our 2013 budget. Our regional P&Ls are channel contribution margin P&Ls in that they contain sales, cost of sales, other cost of sales, selling, and marketing only. They're really the items that a region can control. And then fixed manufacturing, admin, R&D, and some of the global marketing we don't bother to allocate out to the regions. And when we started with this, our goal was to produce a forecast in roughly a 2-week time frame. And frankly, we really struggled with that goal initially. And the idea was to do a quick in and out so we didn't tie up the organization for an extended amount of time. And we also wanted to push people to think at a high level. Don't get caught in the weeds, if you will. Our default tool at the time was a set of Excel spreadsheets that were all linked together on that. And really, given the scope of what we wanted to accomplish, it really became clear quickly that we needed some new tools on that. Because we were using Excel, we really ran into all the typical problems that I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. The spreadsheets get too large too quickly. They're complex. Links are always being broken between spreadsheets, or somebody would forget to update the links before they started reporting numbers. And we really spent a lot of time verifying the spreadsheets and making sure that they're working correctly. Globally, we ended up with multiple approaches to the forecast in spite of our best efforts to standardize the process. There was no consistency. You had typical questions of, did the revenue forecast include a price adjustment? How was the product margin calculated? We always seem to be asking about the process and content. And in addition, as I mentioned, everybody was getting lost in the detail. We worried about every last penny instead of using drivers for the 80% of the expenses that were fairly predictable and focusing on the remaining 20%. And this really, when you're lost in the weeds, you really slow the process down. Our biggest driver is probably our workforce. And it was really impossible to get data on all of our employees across the globe in one place. We tried using Excel spreadsheets, but there was no consistency when it came to forecasting, merit increases, bonuses, or benefits. It was just a confusing mess. And it was also extremely difficult just to compile a list of, headcount adds for the coming forecast period. We were just all over the place on that. We really struggled to keep changes under control, as we tried to finalize the forecast. With these Excel spreadsheets, everybody's always in there messing with them. And there was a lot of cutting and pasting just to create the reporting. We had no standard reports that would easily compare forecast to actual and budget as we reported each month. And then, as I mentioned before, when it came to FX rates, we deal in about 15 different currencies. And because we ran everything in Excel through US dollars, we always had issues. Were the rates being used? Were the numbers we were looking at, were they in US dollars or were they in the local currency? And you spend a lot of time on questions related to process and content. After about a year of producing the forecast and getting it under our belt, we realized that it was really time to take on our pain points. And it became clear that we needed some sort of computer-based tool to organize and improve our forecasting process. We were really wasting too much time trying to check and recheck the Excel spreadsheets and not enough time forecasting. All aspects of a forecast, revenue, margins, expenses, manpower, and capital, can be complex in their own right. To address all these aspects together multiplies the complexity and makes an Excel-based system unmanageable. With all the data generated by a multi-level forecast, we really needed one repository that was readily available by to all of our finance people around the globe. I mentioned drivers, and each location tended to define their forecast drivers in a different manner. Travel is a good example. Some sites looked at just airfare and hotels as their travel. Others included vehicle expense and telephone. There was really no consistency. And one of the first things we did was we tried to standardize our structure and have consistent driver definitions. And this was a huge benefit to do that. It's not that difficult to do. You just have to put it down on paper and then circulate it. Each site had access to its own employee data, and so there was no global consolidation outside of the HR organization. Finance just didn't have access to that information. And we spent a large amount of time forecasting time calculating out salaries, bonuses, and benefits. And we really needed central visibility to all this employee data. And there always seems to be a mystery behind revenue forecasts. And of course, you always get the questions of, did all the locations consider a pricing change? Had they all factored in the new product releases? And it's, when you're Excel-based, it's really difficult to know that for sure. And in terms of our capital plan, we've never really been able to directly link it into our forecast process. We forecast capital, as I mentioned, but it's been a major task trying to get people away from the wish list mentality and to get it into a good tie-in to forecasting. So we started looking around for solutions, and we started by looking at the information provided by Gartner and trying to see who out there is viewed as a strong vendor of forecasting packages. Now, we needed to be conscious of cost. We wanted a low-cost solution, and we also had to consider the fact that we outsource our IT to IBM. So we wanted a solution that finance could implement and support and not have to rely on or pay IBM for every piece of support. We wanted a solution that linked together actuals, budgets, and forecasts in one central database. And since we're an SAP shop, we were required to consider SAP, but we were also given the freedom to look at other software as a solution companies. We considered about 3 or 4 companies plus SAP, and after a considerable amount of research, we went with Host Analytics. We liked the fact that the Host software is very similar to Excel and fairly simple to pick up. We also liked it that we could implement it without a lot of IT support. We had some support from Host Analytics, but there was really no need for technical resources from IBM in this case. The automatic updates and product enhancements that are pushed out by Host periodically meant we never had to drop everything and implement a software upgrade. And we were able to work out, really for a reasonable price, quite a number of licenses. We have about 25 full users, and I think we have about 15 view-only licenses. And as part of the negotiation, we negotiated configuration support to implement. And our international sites were thrilled because they could now forecast in their local currency and not have to try to convert to USD on that. Because the software was fairly straightforward, we saved on training costs because we trained people ourselves. And they came up to speed fairly quickly because they're familiar with Excel, and a lot of it transfers over. We did, in fact, invest in Host and bought the premium training support from them, which was useful. They have plenty of online materials that we were able to tap and use that. We also like the fact that we have a secure system. We have some control, and we're able to restrict access by cost centers and to control the access to sensitive HR data. We bought the 24/7 support from Host, and they've been very responsive to us, so we've never had an instance when we've been left out in the cold on that. Our data uploads each month, we have our process down. Right now, we use a manual process, and actually I'm the one that does it. I pull the data out of SAP, and we close our month on a Wednesday, and I can usually have the month's data loaded into Host by the end of the day on Thursday. If it's going pretty well, I've got it in by noon on Thursday. And then we pull in our HR data once a quarter when we start our new forecast process, so that that's updated and refreshed. We've had the Host software for over a year now, and we've had some great improvements in our process. We've really been able to shorten up our forecasting turnaround to about 2 weeks, And this has really helped with acceptance because people feel it's less burdensome. I'm really pleased with how people are using the software and have really accepted it. Mainly it's the finance community at the moment because we're the drivers of the forecast here and the keepers of it. So, but it's been really well accepted. We've also been able to shorten up our budget process because by the time we got to our budget season this year, we've had numerous forecasts under our belt, and you just really transfer that out, and that becomes your budget for the coming year. Because we can load actuals into Host quickly after our month end, finance can and does use Host as a reporting tool also. Our finance staff has really come to rely on it from that standpoint. It's nice to be able to have the actuals, the budget, and your latest forecast all in one place and be able to report out of it and send it out to people. Really, as an example of how our life has gotten easier, you know, people talk about event-based forecasting and external factors. Well, we are faced right now, as of the first of the year, because we are a medical device manufacturer, the National Healthcare Plan includes a medical device tax, which is basically 2% of our sales. That's a pretty big hit on expense for us, and so we've had to implement a global restructuring to try to cut costs, mainly in our manpower. And so we've had some reductions on that. In the past, we would have turned to Excel to try to sort out the impact of this restructuring and to work out the required adjustments to the forecast and the budget. But with the Host analytics software in place, we've been able to shuffle people within the software and immediately see the impact. And we've been able to develop reports to track our benefits on this and to make sure that we are really realizing the savings that we hope to do. We went out after we did our first couple of forecasts. We went out and surveyed our community as to what they thought about it. The feedback was pretty positive. As I mentioned, we forecast a complete set of P&Ls, a complete or a consolidated balance sheet, and a cash flow. And we also are working more in terms of forecasting and tracking our global headcount. With Business Analytics is the latest product that's coming out from Host. We're able to do more with the headcount analysis globally, which is really nice. We still want to implement constant currency P&Ls. We need to improve our capital forecast, and we'd like to institute scorecards. And right now, as I said, we're in the middle of our budgeting effort. Once we're done and approved, we will upload this back into SAP and be ready to go for 2013. That about wraps it up for me, and I guess at this point I'll turn it back to you, John. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. That was excellent to hear. Really always great to hear what's going on amongst companies that are adopting new technologies and practices, so thank you for that. We have two remaining polling questions. We're going to go ahead and just knock those out 1, 2 real quick here, and then get into questions from everyone on the call here. We've got a number of questions lined up, but go ahead and continue adding questions as they come to you for either Brian or Rick, and we'll do our best to get to them in the remaining time. I'm going to go ahead and leave this polling question open for another 10 seconds or so here, so if you can go ahead and get your votes in, that would be great, and then we'll move on to our third and final polling question, which we'll get to in just a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one down now, and we'll get to our third question right now. And it should be hitting your screen. There we go. How many software/app purchases does your finance and accounting organization buy this year? Buy each year. So this question is across your company, and this includes apps. It could be a T&E app that you're overlaying. It could be ERP, BI, analytics of any sort, et cetera, treasury workstations, you name it. Just trying to get our hands around with the new explosion of technology solutions available. How many things folks are consuming on an annual basis. We'll leave this out for another 15 seconds or so. I will give folks a quick reminder that when we close down this webinar, you will be presented with a brief survey. We greatly appreciate your staying on for just 1 minute. It's all multiple choice. You can bang right through it. Plus, if you'd like to be connected to either of today's speakers or to the sponsor of today's event, Host Analytics, with any follow-on questions, we're happy to help you out with that, and that's just a click of a mouse within the survey. And with that, we'll go ahead and close this down. Normally we would show these polling questions to folks, but we actually have quite a few questions in the Q&A area, so let's try and get a few of those taken care of first, and then if we have time left, we'll go after the polling questions. So jumping into the Q&A now, here's an interesting question. I'm actually going to start with Rick. This person's company is currently contemplating a 3-year rolling forecast. However, this person has raised some issues as to the value of the latter part of that forecast. Well, we could ask the same question about your rolling forecast at Welch, Allyn. Rick, you know, do you guys test how you do in terms of forecasting? Are you tracking your quarters and then measuring against those quarters over time, sort of measuring them as cohorts? How valuable is it forecasting those quarters that are really far out? Has that been a practical undertaking for your company?
Well, I think it's probably a good practice to look at. We like the 18 months because it gets us thinking out that far. The reality is that when you're out that far, it's not that accurate. And so, yes, we are tracking it. We have a ways to go to improve, to be honest with you. Right now, as we looked back just at sales, what we've done, we are at least consistently overestimating our sales number from what the information we get from the field. So we have a bunch of optimists out there, but yeah, I think it's worthwhile to have an extended period. I don't know about 3 years, but 18 months for us is good just because it forces people to think beyond the end of next year.
Mm-hmm. Boy, optimistic salespeople. Never heard that one before. Brian, what are you seeing your clients do in terms of duration of rolling forecast period? Are you seeing an average out there that folks are kind of forming around?
That's a good question. I would say that, you know, Rick is kind of in the sweet spot. So I think that 18 to 24 months is typically what we've been seeing across the customers that are utilizing our software. We do, of course, have some outliers, but, you know, both on either ends of the spectrum. But I'd say the majority fall within that, that 1.5 to 2 years out.
Okay. So next question to Rick. How do you report against your budget? So as you continue to roll on with the quarters, and you say you use the fall quarter to create a budget that then sticks, do you report against that budget as you did back in the old days prior to rolling forecasts? So it's still something that you guys revisit and spend you know, meaningful time reporting against and analyzing, et cetera?
No, we've had to adapt there. The budget is really only pertinent for the first quarter of next year, because by the time we hit March, we've developed our new forecast and we start measuring against that. Now, you still have to have a budget in place because ultimately our compensation plans are still based on a budget. But this past year was a good example. We knew early on that the economy was still soft, and softer than our budget would indicate. And so we put the stops on a lot of things and reforecasted to handle both lower sales and lower expenses and managed to that forecast. So the budget was still out there, but you didn't really compare much to it during the year because it was out of date fairly quickly. So you're going to have to adapt to that.
And that's interesting. Most people would say most budgets are out of date fairly quickly, but you bring up a really interesting point, which is compensation. And I've seen a lot of discussions on the Proformative site in our community about, well, why are people sticking with budgets, period, and compensation is frequently cited. Brian, I'd like to redirect to you again. What are you seeing companies do in this area? Are they still hanging on to their annual budgets as they go rolling? and yes or no, and if they are, is it primarily because of compensation issues, or what are you guys seeing out there with your sort of broader purview?
So, John, actually, it is very similar to what you saw is occurring on the discussions on Proformative. That we have, again, it's a spectrum. But if I go the middle ground, the majority are still holding on to the annual budgeting process, and partly it's I would say the majority seems to be with compensation and related items, and then also it's a little bit of just kind of breaking the mold, right? So introducing a rolling forecast is a good first step, and it can a lot of companies are able to implement a rolling forecast in conjunction with the budget because it becomes a natural extension. And so I think it's just an evolution that we're seeing, right, as rolling forecasts become more prevalent. My guess is, and it's kind of borne out in some of what we've seen from our customers, is that they hold on to the annual budget, and then over time, as they realize that the forecasting process is becoming much more ingrained in their organization, that the budget becomes less of a, we'll call it a gating factor in their process, and they move to an ever-evolving forecasting process versus generating an annual budget. But like I said, for those that are holding on, it's still related to compensation.
Okay, interesting. Rick, how large, for your size company, it's almost 3,000 people globally, how large is your, or is the FP&A staff there?
Globally, we probably have about 30 people or so around the world. We basically have, most of them are here in upstate New York, but we also have a presence on the west coast of the U.S., in Tijuana, and then in Europe, and then scattered around the world in various locations. Southeast
and with
Asia.
the application of, with the application of the new forecasting methodologies and technology, are they finding more time now to work with the businesses, work on analysis, et cetera, and what kind of impact has that had, and what's the feedback been from your business leadership?
The feedback's been pretty good on it because we've really driven home, we have the right environment for it. We've driven home the fact that, look, take your best guess at it and work on improving over time. Don't get hung up and tell us where you're going to spend every nickel. Keep it at a high level. And people are making that shift. And so they're becoming more comfortable with that because they know that they're not going to get beat up if they're off in one particular expense line for a forecast. As long as they're working to improve it over time, that's really the emphasis. And so they're more willing to shorten up the period, and that's why it only takes us 2 weeks really to do a forecast.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, great. Well, at this point, we're about a minute or so away from the end of our hour, and I'd like to go ahead and draw things to an orderly close. We do have a handful of questions that we didn't get to, and I was wondering if I could request from Brian and Rick that we work with you guys to maybe help us answer a couple of these out on Proformative for everyone to see. If you've got some time, that would be greatly appreciated and would help us get to great questions from folks who are interested in what you've done, Rick at Welch, Allyn, and also how this technology can work. Would you guys be willing to give a few more minutes after the event and help us out on that front?
Sure, absolutely.
That would be greatly appreciated. Let's go ahead and go through a couple items before we get to the survey at the end of the event, and we do appreciate everyone staying on and giving us just one more minute to finish up here and then another minute for this survey. So number one, I just mentioned the survey. If you have any questions about CPE credit, you can see Chris Brower's email address at the bottom. Go ahead and drop her a line, and she'll be more than happy to help you out. She is extremely responsive. Please do join us at Proformative.com. We'll work with the speakers today to get the rest of the questions answered. Our apologies for running out of time, but we had so much great content, and we do want to make sure we get everyone out of here on time to be mindful of your time. Certainly a great thanks to our sponsor, Host Analytics, for providing the support that allows us to make this and everything we do at Proformative completely free for all of our users. Thanks to Brian Dehmler-Buckley of Host Analytics and Rick Odom of Welch, Allyn. Greatly appreciate your time and insights this morning. It was really nice to have the theory and then followed by the practice. Thanks so much to both of you for giving us your time and insight this morning. And finally, well, actually, two finallys. One semi-finally, would like to remind folks that Proformative has a tech conference coming up on March 20th in the San Francisco Bay Area. Like everything we do, of course, it's completely free. It'll be a great place to actually see Host Analytics with their product and demos of their product. It's also a great place to see a variety of other finance technology, finance, accounting, and treasury technology. So if you want to learn more about that, you can just go to Proformative, consult on the site. And then lastly, we thank everyone for your time and attention. We realize how busy everyone is these days, and giving us an hour is not easy to do. So we appreciate your giving us this hour. We hope to see you again at another Proformative event in the future and at Proformative.com. So take care, have a great rest of the week, and I'll close down the webinar right now, and you will be presented with the survey. So thanks, everyone. Take care.